After my parents' funeral, my husband laughed and said I inherited a $150 million company. But when I visited the corporate office to claim it, he looked me in the eyes and said, "You're not the owner." I am. Please stay with me as I tell you my story. And please don't forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing this with someone you trust. Because sometimes the ones closest to you are the ones holding the knife. I thought the worst day of my life was burying both my parents in the same week. Turns out, the worst day was 3 days later, when I walked into my father's company to take my seat as the rightful CEO, and found my husband already sitting in the chair. Jack was leaned back behind the mahogany desk, legs crossed, sipping espresso like he'd been there for years. The skyline behind him looked fake, like one of those office wallpapers from a movie. His suit was crisp. Too crisp. And when I opened the door, he didn't even look surprised. "Hey babe," he said without standing. "You're early." I blinked. Early for what? He smiled the way people smile at toddlers asking how airplanes work. "For the meeting. But I guess since we're family, you get an exclusive preview." My fingers curled around the strap of my bag. The conference room was empty, the air freshly vacuumed and cold. I stepped forward, half expecting my father to emerge from behind the tinted glass and call this a test of leadership or some last-ditch prank from beyond the grave. Instead, Jack reached into the desk drawer, pulled out a sleek black folder, and slid it across the desk. "Just so there's no confusion," he said. Inside were legal filings, recent, notarized, impeccably organized. My father's signature, in blue ink, stamped beside a declaration naming Jack as the sole chief executive officer of Halberd Solutions. There was a board vote. There were transfer documents. There was a line where my name should have been, and nothing. My ears buzzed like I'd just stepped off a plane. This has to be a mistake. I'm his only daughter. He would never. Jack let out a short, nasal laugh and tapped the folder twice. "Should have read the prenup, sweetheart." That word, sweetheart, made my stomach turn. I stared at him, at his perfect tie knot, at the cufflinks I'd given him on our anniversary. I couldn't breathe. My father had built this company over 4 decades. I had interned here in high school. I had shadowed him at board meetings. He told me once, "One day this is yours. Not because you're my daughter, because you earned it." And now it belonged to Jack. Jack, who hated wearing ties until suddenly he didn't. Jack, who said the company was too boring to follow. Jack, who now sat behind that desk like it had always been his. I didn't even know what to ask first. How? Why? When? He stood up, smoothed his lapels, and walked toward me with that same smug calm he used when pretending to lose arguments just to end them. "If you'd like to stay on in a consulting role," he said, "I'm sure we can find something for you." Then he winked. That's when I realized this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a coup. I left the office in a daze, barely remembering how I got to the parking garage. Jack's voice echoed in my ears. "Should have read the prenup." I hadn't even known there was a prenup. My father had drawn up the corporate succession plan years before Jack and I ever met. That much I was sure of. I didn't go home. I drove straight to my parents' house, the one with the wraparound porch and the glass sunroom where my father always worked on Sundays. I knew exactly where he kept important documents. The locked cabinet in his study, behind the bookshelf, disguised to look like part of the wood paneling. It had a biometric scanner installed years ago, fingerprint access only. My print still worked. Inside were rows of file folders, meticulously labeled. Tax records, property deeds, partnership agreements. But when I reached for the one labeled last will, original, the folder was empty. Not just missing, removed. Carefully. Recently. I sat on the floor and dumped out the cabinet's contents. Found a draft of the will, unsigned. Pages were dog-eared, notes scribbled in the margins in my father's exact blocky handwriting. But without his signature, it meant nothing. I called my father's attorney, Richard Tallman, the one who'd handled every family matter since I was a teenager. It rang twice, then went to voicemail. I called again, and again. Then his assistant answered and told me he was out of the country indefinitely. And no, she didn't know when he'd be back. That's when I started to feel it. Not just confusion, but dread. I drove to his office. The building was locked. Lights off. Nameplate removed. The entire law firm had vanished overnight. Back at the house, I called my father's personal assistant, Tessa, a woman I'd known since childhood. She answered on the first ring, sounding like she'd been expecting the call. "Tessa, it's me. Where's the will?" She paused. "Everything was handled before the accident." "What does that even mean?" "It means your father didn't want complications," she said, her voice clipped. "He trusted Jack to carry out his intentions." Trusted Jack? My father didn't even trust Jack with the thermostat. Silence. "You're telling me a man who never backed up a phone without printing a hard copy just handed over $1 billion company, without so much as a conversation with me?" More silence. Then a sigh. I'm sorry, she said. That's all I can say. I hung up without replying. Back at home, Jack was in the kitchen eating cereal straight from the box. I didn't say a word until he looked up and said, "Hey, did you pick up more almond milk?" I stared at him. The will is gone. He raised an eyebrow, nonchalant. That's so. The only copy. The signed one. It's just gone. He popped another handful of cereal in his mouth, chewed slowly, then smiled. Weird. That's all he said. Like it wasn't strange at all. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed next to Jack, listening to his steady, oblivious breathing while the ceiling fan above clicked like a metronome counting down to something. My mind wouldn't stop spinning. Through every meeting, every offhand comment, every time my father had looked at Jack with a half smile that maybe wasn't trust after all. By sunrise, I was already dressed and gone. The road to my father's cabin burned into my muscle memory. The place wasn't on any map. It never had been. Hidden deep in the woods upstate, accessible only by a winding dirt road and a rusted gate marked with nothing but moss. The cabin had always been Dad's version of a panic room, except instead of steel and concrete, it was all pine and silence. No phone signal, no internet, just a solar generator, a wood stove, and shelves of annotated philosophy texts and World War II codebreaker biography. Inside, everything was still. The air was dry and smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. A coffee mug, cracked at the handle, rested where he'd last left it, on the porch railing overlooking the woods. His corduroy jacket hung over the back of the rocking chair, like he'd only stepped out for a minute. I made straight for the desk, solid oak, carved with years of use. In the bottom drawer, beneath old notebooks and receipts, was the laptop. A matte black clunker, maybe 10 years old, with tape on one hinge and a physical Wi-Fi kill switch. My father's paranoia dressed as preference. The screen came alive with a whir and flicker, then a password prompt. I tried birthdays, middle names, the company's founding date. Nothing. Then I remembered something I'd once seen scribbled in a notebook margin, his term for catastrophe, lucid collapse. I typed it in. The desktop was clean. One financial program icon, one innocuous folder marked taxes_2015. But something felt off. I dug deeper, clicking through nested folders until I found a hidden directory buried deep in the drive. It was titled, Not If When. Inside were 4 files. The first was an audio file, labeled 011, break.wave. Corrupted. More on that in a second. The second, a PDF scan of a signed shareholder agreement. It transferred 51% of Halberd Solutions, his company, to a trust under my name. No mention of Jack anywhere. Third, scanned images of a full, notarized will, dated 3 weeks before the crash. Signed, official, real. So real it made my chest tighten. And fourth, an email, dated 4 days before their deaths, sent to someone named Emmy. The subject line stopped my breath. If anything happens to me. The body of the email was short and terrifying. Emmy, I don't know how far this goes yet, but it's not just about shares. Someone is leaking internal IP. Jack is involved. I have proof. I can't send it here. I don't trust this channel. If I disappear, check the secondary vault. See. No sign-off. Just see. Like he didn't want even that much traceable. I clicked on the audio file. Static. Then my father's voice, urgent, just before it cut out. If you're hearing this, it means Jack. And then silence. Abrupt. Final. I stared at the screen, my reflection distorted in the black, and the only thought that came to me, clear as glass. He knew. He knew Jack was coming for him, and he tried to leave me a warning. I played the corrupted audio file on a loop, hoping it would give me more, even a sliver of new sound, but it always ended the same. My father's voice clipped right after saying Jack's name, swallowed by static. Still, it confirmed what the email implied. Jack was involved, and my father had known something terrible was coming. I just didn't know how much Jack knew that I knew. Back home, everything felt wrong. I started noticing things that hadn't stood out before. My phone's battery dying faster than normal, even when it was in airplane mode. Apps reopening themselves. Notifications that disappeared before I could read them. I stopped using it unless absolutely necessary. One night, I powered it down completely and locked it in the glove compartment of my car. The next morning, Jack casually asked me why I hadn't responded to his texts while I was at the grocery store. I hadn't told him I went to the store. That night, he came into the living room holding a box wrapped in matte black paper. "I've been meaning to give you this," he said. "Just a little something." Inside was a smartwatch. Sleek. Top of the line. "Health tracking," he said. "And GPS, so if you ever get into trouble out there in the woods, I can find you." He smiled like it was a joke, but it didn't land. I wore it once. Long enough to sync it with a burner phone I'd picked up earlier that day, the kind of cheap prepaid thing you only find behind gas station counters. Then I left the watch in a restroom stall at Union Station, tucked neatly behind the toilet paper dispenser. I sat in a nearby cafe for hours, sipping burnt coffee and watching strangers go by, waiting. At 11:42 p.m., I got a text on my burner. "Jack, where the hell are you?" I didn't answer. By the time I got home, Jack was pacing in the front hallway, jaw tight, hands twitchy. "Are you insane?" he snapped the moment I stepped inside. "What were you doing downtown at that hour?" I froze. "What?" He stepped closer. "You left without telling me. In this city? At night? You're not being smart." I kept my voice calm. "I didn't say I left the house." He blinked. It was subtle, but enough. A crack. "Lucky guess," he said, brushing past me. "Your car wasn't here. I didn't park the car out front. I left it 2 blocks away, tucked behind a dry cleaner's lot." He couldn't have seen it unless he went looking. Or unless he was tracking me in real time. The next morning, I took the smartwatch apart with a jewelry screwdriver. Inside the casing was a thin black chip that didn't belong. I'd seen enough teardown videos to know it wasn't standard hardware. It wasn't a gift. It was a leash. I flushed the chip down the toilet and smashed the rest of the watch with a claw hammer out on the patio. Jack didn't say a word about it. He just glanced at the empty space on my wrist the next day, raised an eyebrow, and said, "You should be more careful. Someone might think you're trying to disappear." He said it so gently, so conversationally, that for a moment I almost forgot to feel terrified. Almost. I didn't know what I was looking for, only that I hadn't found it yet. The scans from my father's laptop proved he intended for me to take over the company, but they didn't explain how Jack had pulled it off. Legal theft like that doesn't happen overnight. It takes structure, paper trails, loopholes buried under other loopholes. So I started digging. At first, I focused on Halberd Solutions, pulling public records, cross-checking filings, even cold calling the Secretary of State's office. Most of the staff gave me standard lines, but one intern in Delaware was new enough not to care who I was. When I mentioned the name of the holding company Halberd had used, he hesitated. "You mean the new one?" he asked. My skin went cold. Apparently, Halberd Solutions had quietly restructured as a Delaware LLC 6 months before the crash. All assets, intellectual property, and voting shares had been absorbed into a new parent company, Halberd Strategic Holdings, LLC. That entity wasn't in my father's name. It listed 2 managing members, Jack, and a second trustee I didn't recognize. I pulled the documents and stared at the names. Jack Thompson and Harold Stein. Harold was my father's old business attorney. He had been disbarred in 2019 for embezzlement. According to the records, they'd held an emergency vote, granting full executive power to Jack. The vote occurred 3 weeks before my parents' deaths. I scanned the file with a dull sense of disbelief, eyes crawling over signatures that were supposedly my father's. But something didn't sit right. I dragged the PDFs into a comparison tool, side by side with earlier contracts signed by my dad over the years. The signatures matched perfectly. Too perfectly. Stroke for stroke. No variation, not even the usual tiny wobble from day to day. I recognized it immediately. Digital copies, pasted onto new documents. They didn't even bother to scan in fresh ink. I closed my laptop and sat there for a long time, the cursor blinking like it was daring me to say something out loud. Jack had forged legal documents. He'd fabricated a corporate coup under the cover of a fake emergency, and somehow no one had questioned it. Not the board, not the state, not even the auditors. Because on paper, it looked legitimate. Only I knew it was a ghost signature. A digital fingerprint pulled from history and used like a weapon. I printed the files and stuffed them into a folder I marked with a sharp red X. Then I put that folder inside my gym bag, wrapped in a pair of old leggings, and zipped it shut. I wasn't ready to confront Jack. Not yet, but I was getting closer to understanding how he stole my entire life. The email arrived at 2:13 a.m. No subject line, no text, just a single attachment. A zip file named confirm_your_crazy.zip. It came from an encrypted Proton Mail address with no name, just a string of numbers. My heart punched against my ribs. I didn't open it at home. I drove to an all-night diner, sat in a booth near the back, and used the guest Wi-Fi on a burner laptop I kept in my car for exactly this kind of thing. The file was huge. Inside were folders, sorted by date, sender, call log, file type. Some were audio recordings, others PDFs, screenshots, spreadsheets. I skimmed the folder labeled voice. The first file was Jack. "I don't care what she suspects," he said, voice crystal clear. "She'll never know until it's done. And if she fights it, we'll make her look insane." I had to stop the clip. My hands were shaking. Back at the top of the zip was a text file, readme_first.txt. "My name is Danielle. You don't know me, but I know Jack. We were together for 2 years. He told me you were unstable. Said he was protecting the company from you. But that was a lie like everything else. I was the one who helped him reroute the company assets, set up the Delaware shell, fake the digital signatures, wipe the audit trail. I thought he was in danger. I thought he loved me. Then he disappeared and I realized I was just another tool. I found out about your parents. About the will. About you. If you're reading this, you deserve to know. Jack's not just lying to you. He's building something behind your back. Offshore accounts. Multiple passports. Exit plans. Use what I've sent. But be careful. He doesn't just cover his tracks. He destroys anyone who follows them. There were screenshots of their conversations. Messages between Jack and Danielle, full of codes and transfers. One showed him wiring money to a crypto wallet in the Cayman Islands. Another showed a conversation from weeks before my parents died. Jack wrote, "Once it's finalized, she can scream all she wants. The board will back me. Her dad's gone. She's just noise." I closed my eyes and sat still for a full minute. The diner felt too bright, too exposed. Danielle had cracked something wide open, and now I couldn't unsee it. In one subfolder labeled calls_May, I found a transcript of a voicemail Jack left for Danielle the night after the funeral. He said, "She's too emotional to think clearly. Grief's doing half the work for us. The rest we'll handle in the vote." He was playing a long game, and I'd been sleeping beside the enemy the whole time. I copied everything to an external drive and wiped the laptop clean. The waitress refilled my coffee. I didn't touch it. I just stared at my reflection in the window, wondering how many other versions of me Jack had burned through before this one. I couldn't stop thinking about the files Danielle sent. Every lie Jack had told, every smile, every quiet gaslight. Now I had proof. But something still didn't add up. The forged signatures, the transferred shares, the emergency vote, it all hinged on the crash. On the timing. On the assumption that my parents were dead and couldn't dispute anything. So I went back to the beginning. I pulled the crash report again, this time through a contact I had at the local coroner's office. She owed me a favor from college, a long story involving tequila and an exam I'd accidentally helped her pass. I asked her to recheck the autopsy results. She hesitated. "There's no autopsy," she finally said. "There's no full confirmation at all." I froze. "What do you mean?" "There were remains, but they were charred beyond recognition. Dental records were submitted." "But I shouldn't be telling you this." "Tell me anyway." "The dental records came in through your father's attorney. But when we double-checked them against state-verified files, they didn't match. It was flagged. Then overridden. Case closed." "Overridden." I thanked her and hung up, hands trembling. If the records were fake, if no real identification had been made, then it was possible. Not likely, not sane, but possible. That night, I called a private investigator. I'd used him before when my roommate's ex was stalking her. He was quiet, efficient, expensive. I gave him a new name this time. No point in risking Jack hearing about it. I asked him to look into international flights, border activity, anything strange tied to my parents in the last 3 months. 5 days later, I got an encrypted email. It contained a single photo. My mother, in a scarf and sunglasses, stepping onto a Lufthansa flight bound for Istanbul via Munich. Clear as day. Dated 3 weeks after the funeral. I stared at the screen until my eyes blurred. My mother. Alive. Breathing. Boarding a plane like she wasn't supposed to exist. The PI had done more than snap a photo. He traced the alias used at check-in, matched the fingerprints she left on her passport to public records from an old civic duty form. It was her. No doubt. My father wasn't in the photo, but another passenger, a tall man in a pea coat, was traveling under an ID tied to one of his shell companies. They'd faked it. Both of them. I went numb. I tried to cry, but nothing came. The grief I'd been carrying for weeks suddenly emptied out like a pulled plug in a bathtub, replaced by cold confusion. Why would they disappear? Why leave everything, and me behind? Why let Jack take over? Unless they knew they couldn't stop him. Not legally. Not publicly. I remembered the email on my father's laptop. If I disappear, not die. Disappear. They hadn't been murdered. They had run. And whatever they were running from, it wasn't just Jack. It was something bigger. Something they thought was worth leaving me for.